Welcome to the Going Mental podcast. My name's Clint Adams. I'm the author of a book called Lighting the Blue Flame, which you'll see behind me. Um, and the nature of that book is about helping young kids that have been bullied, um, and giving teachers, children, parents advice on how to help their children with resilience. It's written around a story, but it's effectively um, using a lot of the techniques I've had over the years working as a counsellor, police officer, and then doing a lot of HR work and running team sessions with group dynamics and all that kind of stuff. And so significant parts of it is, I guess, just things I've learned over the years, things I've read, people I've spoken to, people I've interviewed as part of the book, getting insights from people I've worked with who've been working potentially as patients of mine when I was a counsellor many years ago. My background is as a police officer, working in psychology, studying psychology and sciences over the years, and done a number of other kind of courses in rehabilitation, counselling, and stuff like that. So essentially, this whole podcast is about kind of using humor and trying to also get a message across around mental health in general and resilience in general. It's called Going Mental. Sometimes I'll do a rant, which is also going mental, but then I'm also obviously focusing on the point being, let's be able to talk about mental health. Let's look at different ways we can deal with it, and just also see how we can improve on how we raise our kids, how we raise kids in the community, all that kind of stuff, and how we contribute to it. So look, start off with kind of a fairly normal thing that we do as people. How often is it that someone jumps in line, or you're at the bar getting somewhere, they've deliberately come in, cut in front of you, and get served first, and we tend not to say things. And the reason that obviously we do that is there's some kind of fear factor for that, right? Is it how you were brought up by your parents is like you kind of take a backward step rather than you do the nice thing, you're being courteous, but then some people will take advantage of that. And understanding the psychology behind some of those things and how we've developed those things is kind of important, right? When we think of ourselves as children, we obviously influenced by our parents, influenced by our grandparents, maybe our siblings if you've got older ones, and younger ones, I guess, over time. But yeah, essentially that's your first group of people, close family. You don't kind of go out on your own, all that sort of stuff. But then obviously those parents' core values, their religion, all that stuff is, you kind of impart that on your child. So the expectation is that they would kind of follow on the way your thought process is. And for most part, in most societies, that's probably a pretty good thing. Having said that, having been a cop, not every person's make great parents. Some people come from backgrounds that have been a negative influence, and then they've carried that on from their parents, and those kinds of things continue, and you see patterns of generations of that type of behavior. So understanding kind of how that works, but then also understanding that there's a point as a person as you come through maybe childhood trauma, all that sort of stuff, that there's a part that you need to take control of. As a cop, I've worked with you know parents who've been terrible role models to their kids. You kind of see the kids are younger, and if you're in the police long enough, you see those kids grow up, and then unfortunately, you do see very similar traits from those kids that their parents have exhibited, and so obviously that whole process continues. There's also a lot of anger that come with that. Low socioeconomic things come with that. It creates different patterns. It also shows that traditionally certain things will uh, give you a greater chance of having a poor outcome. So there's this thing called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs as they call it, where there's a number of factors that come in, and if you've got more than four of those, your parents are alcoholic, you come from a low socioeconomic background, for example, um, there's childhood trauma, physical abuse, verbal abuse, a number of things, right? So if a number of those things happen to you as a child, you're more likely to end up with mental health problems, which also can lead to physical health problems. And so understanding that just from a health perspective, that isn't etched in stone, because because there's lots of people that have those things happen to them and they were able to kind of not come out the other end in a bad way. So understanding those positive deviants, as we call it, where, you know, all these horrible things have happened to them, but they've been able to come out the other end. Why is that? So what are some of the key things that you see people are doing better when other people get stuck there? And even though that predictor is a higher incidence if you've had those ACEs along the way, there's many other things that influence you, not just these ACEs. I will talk more about some of those things, but understanding kind of the whole process of how you develop your own kind of personality, call it whatever you want. You know, some people call it belief system, whatever it is. Like if you're a child, for example, and you know your parents are nasty and they call you useless, you know, they beat you up, they're constantly scolding you for doing stuff, and that's the only environment you've grown up in, right? Because when you're a child, like I said, that first kind of those circles of influence around you early on have a massive impact. Mostly positive, you would like to think, but then they also have the negative ones, right? So there's kind of two parts to this story, right? There's the what's happened to the parents before because they've been kids and how they've brought that whole process, and maybe they've had trauma. You can usually say that, you know, someone that was abused is more likely to be an abuser themselves. You'd think they'd want to break the pattern because they didn't like it when it happened to them, but there's also an element within the psyche around not knowing any different and kind of being attracted to the stuff that happened to you. It's like, you know, for example, some people in relationships will go back to an abuser or pick someone similar once they've got out of an abusive relationship. They go back to it because it's kind of what they're used to. It's kind of what they're attracted to because they see it and they've built themselves up. So, you know, understanding those kind of patterns of what you've done, patterns of what you've learned along the way, and then really being quite critically assessing, is this good for you? You know, going forward, is this good for you? Do you need to make some changes? Do you need to go, you know, I don't need validation from a particular person, or I am attracted to that type of individual, but it's risky for me and I usually have a bad outcome. So understanding that, being super critical of how, you know, where you want to get to, your own relationships, in your own well-being. Because a lot of times what happens is some of the people that have those issues have low self-esteem. So they're seeking validation. They'll be more promiscuous. They'll go out and do things that are more risky to kind of give them that buzz. But then when it's over, or they've done those particular things, they feel worse about themselves, which again contributes to them lacking that, you know, self-assessment of themselves, and lacking that real ability to go, I'm comfortable in my own skin. I don't have to do these things to do it. So it's kind of a bit of a cycle, a vicious cycle for them, where they get self-loathe on themselves for doing certain things. Then they go and do something that'll get them up, whether that's taking drugs, whether that's being promiscuous and, you know, having sexual flings and all that kind of stuff. And then when they sit after that time, they really think about it, those same things that they just did makes them feel worse about themselves. So now they're going to go do that all over again. They're drinking, they're taking drugs, they're doing that promiscuous kind of activities and all that stuff. So all these things give you a cycle. So understanding your own cycle, understanding how you can kind of break some of those things as you get older. There's a point where you can do that more deliberately, and this is part of the reason I'm doing this, is literally about helping people who kind of get to that certain age. Obviously, when you're much younger and you're influenced by your parents and those people around you, and you've got poor self-esteem, it's difficult to break that pattern as a child. It's a bit more deliberate, and you can think there's a more mature part of the brain that's coming through. Your prefrontal cortex is really only coming into its own in your adulthood. So understanding that, using that to your advantage as you get to those ages, is a key part of stepping forward and moving forward and breaking patterns that really suit you. See you next time.